This story began in Spain, Madrid, 1834. You're summoned to the palace, not to heal, but to preserve. Ferdinand VII is dead. Queen Regent Maria Cristina stands beside his corpse, grief-stricken, and delivers a command that turns your stomach. It must be saved. You lift the silk sheet and recoil. What lies beneath is not just the grotesque anatomy of a man. It is the physical legacy of a tormented reign, misshapen, monstrous, infamous. This thing had shaped the destiny of a nation. Ferdinand came from centuries of royal inbreeding, the product of a family tree tangled with cousins, uncles, and nieces. From birth, he was the embodiment of genetic decay. Physically flawed and emotionally stunted, he grew up under the weight of silent laughter and veiled shame. His tutors, appointed more for loyalty than intellect, described him as dull, erratic, easily enraged. He flinched at music, hated being touched, and struggled to form coherent thoughts under pressure. But worse than his mind was what lay beneath his robes. Behind velvet curtains, servants whispered of the crown prince's deformity. His anatomy, it was said, was not simply large, it was unnatural. Crooked, heavy, unmanageable. A burden, not a gift. He avoided mirrors, intimacy, and connection. His world was shadows and silence, humiliation and rage. From a young age, Ferdinand displayed an intense fear of doctors and healers. When forced to undergo examination, he would lash out or sob uncontrollably. No one dared speak of it openly, but everyone knew something was deeply wrong. And yet, to the public, he was presented as the hope of the dynasty. Painters softened his features. Poets wrote about his divine right. But inside palace walls, his mother wept at night, and his father avoided looking him in the eye. He spent most of his youth inside the palace, confined to chambers lined with portraits of his ancestors, most of them products of the same inbred bloodline. He would stare at their eyes, searching for resemblance, for answers. Sometimes, he claimed, they blinked. Medical notes describe his organ in clinical horror. Twisted, oversized, deformed. A valet once muttered, it looked forged by nightmare, not nature. To consummate a marriage, Ferdinand required apparatuses, pillows, braces, supports, not for pleasure, for safety. Rumors spread of devices made of leather and ivory, padded with velvet to reduce bruising. They were crafted by secret artisans sworn to silence. His first bride, Maria Antonia of Naples, screamed at the sight of him. Her terror was so great, she had to be sedated. That wedding night became a ritual of restraint, preparation, and opium, not love. The palace knew, but no one dared speak. The following mornings were silent. She grew sickly, withdrawn, addicted. Her servants said she trembled at the sound of his footsteps. Her hair began to fall out. She miscarried twice, and then she died. Ferdinand didn't mourn. He accused her of betrayal, sabotage, witchcraft. Servants who whispered were punished. Artisans who built his tools disappeared. Some say they were silenced permanently. Paintings of her were quietly removed from the palace. Behind closed doors, Ferdinand grew more paranoid. He demanded astrologers check his birth chart daily. He refused to sign royal decrees unless the ink was mixed with holy water. One night he burned all his childhood portraits, screaming they had watched him suffer. He began collecting religious relics, bones of saints, splinters of ancient crosses. He believed they held power, that they could heal his curse. He slept with them under his pillow. One morning he awoke covered in blood, clutching a sharp relic like a weapon. Obsessed with producing an heir, Ferdinand drank concoctions made of powdered rhino horn, crushed emeralds and roots pulled from graveyards. He burned incense imported from the East. He prayed, fasted, bled himself. Nothing worked. He consulted mystics, alchemists, and exorcists. One ritual involved Ferdinand lying naked beneath a blood-soaked sheet, while chanting monks walked circles around him. Another required a virgin to touch his chest with a consecrated chalice. All in vain. His second and third wives suffered the same fate: miscarriages, trauma, silence. Maria Josefa, his third queen, approached intimacy as science. She documented their sessions, timing each movement, cataloging every reaction. She treated it like research. Ferdinand, feeling mocked, accused her of espionage. The Spanish Inquisition was long gone, but its spirit remained. When she finally conceived, he reacted with fanatical zeal. Priests were stationed at her door. Guards followed her into the bath. No one was allowed to speak her name aloud. The child died in the womb. So did she, and Ferdinand kept their bodies unburied for 3 days, demanding divine intervention. The palace rotted in death's stench. He ordered the chapel repainted in black. For weeks he walked its halls, reciting Latin verses no one understood. He claimed to see ghosts. One minister recorded him speaking to the portrait of his dead father, begging for forgiveness. He ordered every mattress in the palace replaced, convinced that they whispered at night. When his horse tripped on a stone, he had every cobblestone in the courtyard turned over. Madness was no longer creeping. It was raining. If this story disturbs you, it should. And there are more like it. Forgotten monarchs, hidden files, obscene secrets buried in history's shadows. Subscribe if you haven't already, and join us as we uncover the dark underbelly of royal power. Because what's grotesque is often true. His last wife, Maria Cristina, came pregnant. Ferdinand knew. He accepted. It was the only way he'd have an heir. He called it divine providence. Others called it quiet desperation. He signed documents declaring her womb sacred. Her bedroom was guarded by sword-bearing eunuchs. When Isabella was born, Ferdinand spiraled further. He became convinced Maria Cristina was poisoning him. He drilled peepholes into her walls, watched her pray, eat, sleep, ordered her food tasted by 3 different servants. He demanded she be inspected physically before lying beside him. He spoke of devils, shadows, destiny. His ministers stopped arguing. They simply nodded, then left the room in silence. When he wasn't in her chambers, he was praying in the royal chapel, where he burned letters and muttered verses about purity and kingship. By his final months, he refused to sit on the throne itself. He claimed it whispered lies. Instead, he sat on a wooden stool and wore no crown. He once ordered all mirrors in the palace to be smashed. He claimed they distorted his soul. One evening he walked barefoot across shards of glass, bleeding silently, smiling. His final portraits were painted in secret, capturing not power but decay. His face bloated, his hands trembling, his eyes distant. Some say he no longer recognized himself. He died a shell of a man, bloated, raving, paranoid. The autopsy revealed scars, both from birth and from decades of self-mutilation. He had tried to change himself with fire and blades, alone, in secret, in shame. The organ was preserved and locked away in a private reliquary, later transferred, some say, to the vaults beneath the Vatican, a final symbol of a reign ruled not by law but by deformity, fear, and delusion. Ferdinand VII didn't just damage his wives. He didn't just deform the monarchy, he mutilated a nation. He left behind a legacy of fear, death, and silence. And his story, like so many others, almost disappeared. Almost. If you're still here, you're one of the curious few. For more untold stories that history tried to bury, subscribe. Comment who you'd like us to expose next.